right. So we're going to get to the planned Agnon story for today, but I'm going to begin with a different one. You'll understand very quickly why. It's one of his most famous, from foe to friend. The narrator tries to settle in the outskirts of Jerusalem 4 times in pre-civilized Talpiot, which is the neighborhood very close, very, very close to which I live and Nechama lives, where he encounters what he calls in the story the king of winds, who at that time rules the land. And the wind tries to thwart the protagonist's attempt to live there and to build a home. The story has been interpreted to be a struggle between humanity and nature, because it's between the wind and a person, but more significantly between building and destruction. The wind appears as a satanic figure, a force of evil. There's a conquest of the wind, and building over the desert means ultimately, in the person who's trying to build, that there will be, he believes, love among the neighbors. But Agnon stresses in the story the necessity, if that's going to come about, the necessity of building a strong house with deep foundations on firm land. Now, this is pretty much autobiographical, because Agnon, when he moved to Israel, he made 4 attempts to live in this neighborhood. In 1924, there was a fire. 1927, there was an earthquake. And in 1929, there was looting by Arabs. And in 1948, there was a bombing by Arabs. You'll excuse me, but I was not going to call off the class. Agnon vows to build a house, and eventually he did. And it's about a 10-minute walk from here to Beth Agnon. He builds a house in the very place that the terrorists sought to destroy, surrounded by a garden and trees. The story ends with him bringing saplings and seedlings and planting them until there is a lovely garden and trees. The wind still attacks the new house, trying to destroy it again. But he finds that it's now too strong. to be demolished. Instead, he knocks on the door, and Agnon, as it were, says, "Who is it?" And he says, "It's your neighbor, but your door is locked." He says, "Yes, it's locked." He says, "But I want to be next to you." He says, "Okay." But you have to understand how to behave. And I'll just read you the last page. When the soil was ready, I brought some saplings. Before long, the saplings became trees with branches. I made myself a bench and I sat in their shade. And one night, the wind returned. The wind had lost his breath. He turned and went away. From that time on, the wind has been quite humble and meek. And when he comes, he behaves like a gentleman. And since he minds his manners with me, I mind my manners with him too. And when he comes, he brings with him a pleasant smell from the mountains and valleys. Since he behaves nicely, I never remind him of his wicked ways. And when he leaves me and goes on his way, I invite him to come again, as one should with a good neighbor. And we really are the best of neighbors, and I am very fond of him, and he may even be fond of me. Well, he wrote that story, and he was very hopeful. However, his optimism did not last, as is shown in the next story that he wrote. First Sergeant Aner Shapira grew up in Agnon's Talpiot. Grew up. He was murdered at the age of 22 on that black Shabbat, protecting, saving others as he shot at the murderers at that nature party down south. He was one of 7. Daniel is going to show us a clip of his parents. It's in Hebrew, but we'll just watch a moment, and after I will explain what his mother is saying. Daniel, please.
הוא רץ הכי מהר, והוא הכי חזק, אבל היה באותה מידה ברור שהוא בחיים לא יעשה את זה. הוא אמר, אני אעמוד בפתח, אני אזרוק את הרימונים, זאת אומרת, זה היה לא משהו לא מתוכנן, והוא הצליח, והוא הציל כל כך הרבה אנשים, ואני לא נפרדת ממנו, אני לא נפרדת ממנו.
כושר חלב ישראל, משהו, הנה, כשר חלב ישראל, משהו, תפוח אדמה בכלל.
באותו סוף שבוע, אנר שפירא, בן 22, היה בכלל בחופשה מהצבא. הוא הבכור מבין 7 אחים, בנם של שירה ומשה. בערב שמחת תורה, ישבו לארוחה חגיגית.
כולנו היינו ביחד, והייתה לנו ארוחה ממש כיפית, ממש טובה.
גם אמרנו, כמה שאנחנו נהנים.
גם כל כך נהנינו שאמרנו שאנחנו נהנים.
זה ממש היה...
היה לנו כיף, היה לנו באמת ארוחה כיפית. ידעתי שהוא בדרום במסיבה, הוא אמר לנו.
כאילו, הוא לא באמת אמר לאף אחד שזה בעוטף עזה. לא נראה לי שגם הוא ידע, הוא כזה. פשוט הלך למסיבה עם חבר שלו.
החבר הוא הירש גולדברג, כאן בתמונה.
זה הנר, וזה הירש חבר שלו.
עכשיו כמעט עולה השמש. הנר והירש נהנים במסיבה. בת הזוג שלי נמצאת במסיבה אחרת
That's his
באזור.
girlfriend,
ולפני שהיא הולכת לישון,
and the other young man was kidnapped.
וחמש דיברנו, מתגעגע וכזה. ממש שיחה סטנדרטית, כאילו. כשקמתי אז אמא שלי אמרה, כאילו, תבדקי מה עם הנר וזה,
ואז שלי חברה שלו התקשרה אלינו.
תגידי, דיברתי עם הנר, אמרתי לה, בטח הקפיצו אותו, דיברתי איתו לפני, אז היא אמרה לי, לא, אבל אני דואגת, והמסיבה, והוא לא דיבר מאז המסיבה, אמרתי לה, מה הבעיה עם המסיבה?
Okay, Daniel. So they're describing what their son was willing to do to save the others. They wouldn't have expected less of their son. On the other hand, what can you say? And the mother is saying, I will never separate from him. Hundreds of us, that was on Saturday, and his funeral was last Friday. And as I say, they live in our neighborhood, and hundreds of us gathered outside their home as a bus took them to Mount Herzl, where he was to be buried. Yehi Zichro Baruch. And of course, there were many such
stories. Yeah.
Except they're real stories. So what is a daily activity like? I've already hinted at it. Yesterday, I went for a flu shot. And one of the nicest people at that clinic is the man who cleans, and he's an Arab. And while I was waiting, a woman and I started chatting, a woman that I don't know, and we both agreed how nice he is. And she started saying much nicer than the secretary. And then from there, I went to the market to buy the ingredients for the cookies that were going to be made. And then last night, we had what was very much needed. My sister-in-law and her daughter, David's wife and daughter, and Nechama and one of her daughters, and Batya and me, we gathered here for a games night. Surreal, because in between the games and the laughter, yes, laughter, Mayan described her sister, one of her sister's sons, was at that very same party. And he and his friends heard something that made them suspicious right away. And thank God they decided to try to get away right away. And thank God they did. Last week, we referred, I'm going to share my screen, to, just 1 second, please. To a sense of unity. When I said how all those reservists who threatened not to join, more than 100% showed up. And that sense of unity is still there in a country that was so split. And the sense is people are pleading that we not return to that, please God, after this. And in this article from Times of Israel, I believe from yesterday, one of those divisions is referred to. Rav Menachem Bambech wrote, but before I even do that, Yachad Ninatzeach, it's seen everywhere. And last night, it was on every university and institution of higher education throughout the country, even in places where there were sirens going, it was lit up. Together, we are undefeatable. And that is the belief. So Rav Bambach writes, I'm stopping myself because I could go on and on about that, but not yet. On Simchat Torah, I found myself in a quandary. As the head of the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Berdichev community in Beitar, and a soldier in the IDF reserves, I was torn. We heard sirens during the morning services, and rumors were spreading about something larger than just missiles being shot into Israel. We saw cars filled with reservists and soldiers departing for their army bases. I told my wife that I thought I should turn on my cell phone to see if I had also received a call up. She encouraged me not to turn on the phone. You are on reserve duty of a different kind, she said, in the synagogue. We're going to get back to that sentence. Saturday evening, after the holiday ended, I turned on my phone and found my call-up order. I put on my uniform and reported to the home front command, ready for whatever duty was required of me. Zaka volunteers are working around the clock to collect and identify bodies, many of which are burned and mutilated, including babies and children, a horrific and challenging task, which is considered chesed shel emet, because people who did that aren't going to get anything back from the people who they've just taken care of. The ultimate act of altruistic kindness, because the recipient cannot express gratitude. Many young Haredi men have also volunteered to dig graves, since the staff of the burial societies cannot possibly keep up with the demand. Rabbi Meir Nachman El-Haddad, who lost 2 sons in the tragedy at Mount Meron, remember a few years ago on Lag BaOmer, dispatched himself to the Lahav 433 Bereavement Center, where he has been comforting families who have come to identify the bodies of their family members. Perhaps the most surprising development of all is that there are currently dozens of initiatives in the Haredi community to join the IDF. Rabbi Raphael Kreuzer, head of the Lama'an Da'at Beit Midrash, has publicly called for thousands of yeshiva students to join the military, saying, our people are in danger. It is incumbent upon us to be there in practice with true devotion and to put our lives on the line. At the time of this writing, more than 1,000 Haredi men have asked to join in the defense of the country. That's beyond those who have already joined. The IDF is responding positively to their requests, even in the middle of the war, and is planning fast-track training programs to integrate Haredim into the army. the Belzer Rebbe has called and his community to say the Misha Berach prayer for the soldiers, the IDF, in their synagogues. This may seem trivial, but it is a real game changer in a community that has historically shunned the IDF in dramatic ways at a time of incredible transformations taking place across Israeli society. It is clear that we are experiencing a national trauma that will leave deep scars on the souls of every one of us. And it will have a huge impact on the nation as a whole. The disagreements between us have evaporated, and we are suddenly able to demonstrate our love for one another in hospitals, in blood donation stations, in equipment distribution centers, and in cemeteries. This past Shabbat, we began a new cycle of Torah reading. Starting from Genesis, the story of creation reminds us that the world began in chaos and darkness, but humankind was given the responsibility to build a world of morality. There are those who sabotage morality and behave like predatory beasts, showing the lowest form of human behavior. It has now fallen to us within the Haredi community to counter that depravity with a moral stance and to say to our compatriots, this is our opportunity. We should stand shoulder to shoulder with our brethren in this national emergency. Now, I said we would get back to his wife's statement. The first impulse would be, yes, of course, put on your cell phone. And there was halachic permission given to do so in a time like that. But what do you think of his wife's sentence? On the other hand, you are on reserve duty of a different kind, she said in the synagogue. What do you think? Try to be open-minded, especially since you were hopefully all in synagogue. That was a little...
Is it open?
Stan, I hear you.
Yes. Is she saying, I'm not sure where I stand on this, but my interpretation, she is saying that we have to pray. You're on reserve duty. You're in the synagogue. We have to pray that Hashem will do something for us.
I think that's what she is saying. She's saying there's some significance also to that role of prayer.
Yes.
You know, that there's something significant about that as well. Don't underestimate that as well. Anyone else? And I like the way you began that by saying you're not sure where you stand on it. Well, I get that.
You know, I was thinking about on fasting on Yom Kippur. Halachically, if there's medical reasons why you shouldn't, you don't.
Absolutely.
Right? So I'm trying to figure this out here. Okay.
No, and the Yom Kippur War, the chief rabbi told all the soldiers, don't you dare fast.
True. No, that's true.
Right.
Anyone else?
Yes,
Sarah.
I would like to say something.
Please.
She doesn't want to lose him.
That's a personal point of view.
And there is a big chance that he could be killed if he goes. And she doesn't want that to happen. She would rather see him in the synagogue, not only praying, but helping to in the part that the chazan plays, because maybe the chazan is going to be called up, and they need people in the synagogue to lean, to read from the Torah, to sing the songs, to do the service. So he could do that probably, but to go to war, she doesn't want him to go.
Of course not.
Okay, I think Sarah's being honest that could be a reason, although I'm sure she would agree that no wife really wants her husband to go.
No.
But that just can't be. Go ahead.
There's a late rabbi that we both know, all of us know, who used to use the phrase, religion was seichel. I'm sure you heard him say that. And
explain, Sipora.
Religion with wisdom and choice of common sense at a certain time. So this is a personal decision that she made, and he doesn't know what to do, and she's telling him what she thinks in her mind is the most sensible thing to do. It's a very, very personal decision. And that I remember a certain rabbi that we know and love, that would say religion was seichel, with wisdom and choice and thought. That's all. That's what I'm thinking. And it's a tough decision. But we need as many soldiers as possible, and it's Shabbat, and we need to help ourselves to survive, as what was the horror that happened 2 Shabbatot ago. You make a decision. We need the soldiers there. It's tough.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I'm thinking what's coming to my mind is the difference between him making a decision and someone like Roe Klein, if you remember that name from, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I forget which war, but somebody who, without a thought, he was a father, a young man who had 2, probably under the age of 5 children, and he just jumped on a grenade and saved his unit.
Right.
But he wasn't making a rational, or maybe he was, and like Rabbi Akiva, his fellow soldier reported to us, he said his last words were Shema Yisrael, and so he just did what came to him to save the others. So there were discussions. Was his wife upset with him for doing that? Were his children upset for him choosing to do that and let them grow up without a father? These are all questions. Or do they grow up feeling their father gave his life for their people? That's how, of course, the story is going to be told to them. And we have to give our thanks for these people who do this. And you wonder, when you hear of these young men choosing, I told you last week how somebody who wasn't being called up, he did everything that he could to be called up. Crazy?
Bracha.
Marlene.
Hello? Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I'm using my phone instead because I'm having trouble with my computer.
Okay.
I would really be on the horns of a dilemma. Because thinking about pekuach nefesh, And if I were a religious soldier who was getting a call on my phone to come well, he didn't really know, but if I was getting a phone call on Shabbat, it would have to be an emergency situation. And I would have a great deal of difficulty refusing to take that phone call.
Yeah.
Marlene, he wouldn't have the phone with him if he's Orthodox. It would be at home.
No, but he is at home.
If
He
he's
is at home.
not
Or
in shul.
turned off.
Yeah, or not in shul.
And there are stories of that. The phones were turned off.
Yeah.
And then when they heard the news, they started putting their phones on, saw there were a million messages calling them up.
Yeah.
To reserves.
But
yeah, the phone is
that's
not
what
on.
Well, he's at morning services.
No. He hasn't gone
Ah.
yet because it's 6:30 in the morning.
Ah.
But they hear the sirens. So he's thinking, though, that he should check his phone to see if he's been called up. So it's basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
It's a tough call.
Yeah. Not easy decision.
No.
I just want to add something here. There are the reservists that are being called up and they don't really have a choice and they go. And there's another group alongside these incredible people who are volunteering, who are saying, we're going in, and they don't have to. Age-wise, they don't have to. I have 4 doctors at the hospital I work with, just sent me, sorry, I will not be in. I'm volunteering here, there, the other. I took a young man today home from the hospital. He needed a lift. And he's in his 30s, and he told me, I asked how his, because he was gone for 2 weeks, and when I saw him 2 days ago walk into the hospital, I ran over to him and wanted to hug him, and I said, may I? And he said no, because he has a kippah on his head, and he didn't want me to. I think he wanted me to, but I wasn't allowed to. Because I just love him. He's in his 30s and he's just a real neshama. And then I said, tell me, how are the kids dealing with the fact that their father disappeared and the sirens and everything? And he said, they know I'm in the army. But the 8-year-old asked him, Abba, what do you do in the army? So he says, I make order. I straighten things out. He just didn't bother to tell her that he's straightening out the bags, because he works in Zaka. So he did not explain to her what the body bags were and what exactly he does. And I was sitting in the car with him and being as empathetic as I could and just thinking to myself, everybody is talking about the Black Sabbath that passed. And yet, and this is the reality in Israel, and it's not really connected, Bracha, but I can't help it.
Go ahead.
It is not over. It is not over.
No.
We're waiting to go into Gaza by foot. And when I say we, it's not me. But if there is one person, I don't know anybody who doesn't have a connection to somebody who's waiting to go in, who's already in, who's in the north. People aren't sleeping. People aren't functioning. People like Shirley Ann, who is just imagining the condition of her cousin. People who are burying people every single day, funerals and shivas, and this is not in the past. What happened is not in the past. It's continuing, and we have no idea what is going to happen. And we have no control, and everybody's trying to get some control, but we don't have control over what we don't know and what is ahead. We just don't. And I'm sorry to be as grim as that, but it's the reality. and it's the truth. And that's why being here now is so, so hard. And at work, there is such a division. I hug my Arab workers, but some of them I know exactly what they're thinking, but we have to make a separation because it's a microcosm of all Israeli society, and we're in a hospital, we're in rehabilitation for children, and blah, blah, blah. And we're all for one and one for all, but it's really, really, really hard. And now I've given my speech, and Bracha, you can take it from here and do with it what you want. But I had to say it because I couldn't sit in a group with people from out of the country and not say and not reflect what's really, really going on here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nechama.
It had to be said.
She didn't tell you that she was talking to Yonit, who is Tzaki's sister, last night. And she told her that she's glad that her parents and our parents aren't around to see this.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Holocaust survivors must be so either angry or depressed. They must be suffering
All over again.
much more than we could ever imagine.
Agree. 100%.
To see this again, to see
Yep.
the same thing happening again.
Yep.
And I think about 10 minutes after President Biden took off from Ben Gurion Airport, rockets came down again on Tel Aviv and the surrounding areas. And the concern is now, if we're back into this, but we will get to our short story. That we not be swayed from what Israel must do, which couldn't be done during the Shoah. Yossi Klein Halevi, which some of you I know are familiar with, said, and he, I think, Stan, you're familiar with him, the one who wrote the letters.
Yes, yes.
So he has just said, and he is a sympathizer with the Palestinians. Left-wingers need to understand the Jewish people cannot afford the purity of powerlessness. I'm going to repeat.
We're powerless.
The left wing need to understand the Jewish people cannot afford the purity of powerlessness. The right wing, and at first you might not like this, some of you, need to understand power requires moral limits. And that's why Israel tells the citizens, the people of Gaza, to get out of there. And while the Gaza government tells them to stay.
Right.
To be shot and murdered.
Right.
And they blow up the hospital. And he goes on to say, we must not be indifferent to the anguish of Gaza, and that's why we tell them to leave, as they are placed near ammunitions and bombs. And we must not allow that anguish as humanitarians to undermine our resolve
Have to do what they have to do.
to get rid of Hamas. And if we don't get rid of Hamas, we will face even the worst Hezbollah.
Exactly.
So some people are mixed by Biden's visit because there is a sense, and I last week praised him for that magnificent speech. But there's a sense that maybe he was coming here and also cautioning not to go in to Gaza. Now, who wants our soldiers to go on foot into Gaza?
No
one.
You know how dangerous that is. But they don't want to bomb because that increases the people who will be killed. But then we'll be killed? I want, as an introduction to the story we're going to look at today, the Tzadik's broken Etrog. There's a dilemma between ritual and responsibility, perhaps, to basic needs. But getting back to the question of the wife, to Rabbi Bambach, let's look at that purpose of ritual. And I think it's in place at this time as well. And I would go as far as to say that the people who are making these cookies and baking the challah bun, that's a ritual today. And gathering and accompanying people as they bury their loved ones, that's a ritual that's going on and will go on and go on. So Rabbi Shimon Felix wants to understand the importance of ritual. And when he's discussing Parshat Truma, like all the details that are given when they're building the tabernacle, and he says the following: there's a lot of heroism in Genesis and Exodus, and then we get to all these laws about building the tabernacle. So listen to what he says. The Torah, after the heroic period of Genesis and Exodus, now moves on to grapple with a question that we must all deal with in our own lives. How can one live a life without transcendence, without heroism, without the fantastic events which only rarely befall a nation or an individual? There is a gap, a dissonance in our lives between life as we may, at some heroic moment, have lived it, or as it may have been lived in some distant heroic past, or in some half-imagined future, and life as we actually experience on a day-to-day basis, taking out the garbage, fighting with our parents, fighting with our kids, studying for tests, changing diapers, going to the bank, paying bills. Very few human beings live lives of intensely heroic activity, and yet we long for a life that is heroic, transcendent, full of ultimate meaning. We want such a life. We need such experiences. Parshat Truma, on the other hand, gives us another way, a very different way to make our lives heroic. I'm just going to summarize what he says here. By these rituals, whether it's the Seder or whether it's Sukkot, that it gives us a way of reenacting these events. So God help us. We don't want these heroic times. We don't want to have to do these rituals, but we certainly have to realize that life is so precious and so, as we said last week, so transitory that we have to do things in life that are meaningful. So let's look at this story. And there's a part of it that we might be a little bothered by. So we have to know how to balance between ritual, and you'll see what it says here. One year, it was already hours before Sukkot, and the rabbi's wife did not have a morsel in the house for celebrating the holiday. She thought, I will go tell my husband, he will hear and know my distress. She went to his solitude room, stood in the doorway and said, Sukkot Eve is upon us and I still have no festival provisions. That righteous man lifted himself from his chair, poked his head out from under his prayer shawl, put his hand on his tefillin and said to her, you are worried about meat and fish, and I am worried about not yet having my etrog. She kissed the mezuzah on the doorpost of his room and left dejectedly. That righteous man stood up and went all over the house looking for something to sell and used the money to buy an etrog. He looked and looked, but did not find a single thing worth an etrog. He fondled his tefillin and mused. The 9 festival days are approaching, and during the festival, tefillin aren't worn, and my tefillin were written by a holy man of God. Who writes each and every letter in holiness and purity, investing the most sublime and most awesome intents and purposes in the writing of each and every character. Tefillin of his make are much sought after and command a high price. I will sell them, and with the proceeds I will get me an etrog. Rab Michla removed his tefillin and took them and went to his Beit Midrash and asked, who would like to buy my tefillin? Certain man stood up and said, I will buy them. He took out a gold dinar and gave it to the righteous man, and the righteous man handed him his tefillin. The righteous man took the dinar and ran to the etrog seller to get him an etrog. He saw a beautiful etrog judged to be kosher and perfectly formed. Now, a truly righteous man, when he buys an object for performing a divine precept, doesn't bargain. All the more so when it comes to an etrog, about which is it written, and on the first day of Sukkot you shall take a fruit of the beautiful tree and rejoice before the Lord your God. Reb Michla returned home happy that he had come by a beautiful etrog, possessing all the qualities that are lauded in an etrog. He went into his sukkah to fix something and returned to his solitude room. He sat down in his chair and placed the etrog before him and ruminated on this precept that God had given the Jewish people to observe during these holy days of Sukkot, a holiday adorned with a multitude of precepts to observe. His wife, the Rebbitzin, heard that her husband had been to market. She went into his room. She saw the glow in his face and the ecstasy emanating from his entire being. The Rebbitzin thought he had brought home all the festival victuals. She said to him, I see you are happy. You must have brought us the festival provisions. Give them to me and I will prepare them for it. It's nearly time. The righteous man rose from his chair, put his hand on his eyes, and said, praise be the blessed and sublime name for bestowing his grace on me and fulfilling my every need. The Rebbitzin stood there waiting for her husband to deliver. He sat back down in his chair and told her he had been privileged to acquire a kosher etrog. She asked him, how did you have money to get an etrog? He said to her, I sold my tefillin for a gold dinar and bought me an etrog. She said to him, in that case, give me the change. He said to her, they didn't give me any change. All the money they gave me for my tefillin, I gave for my etrog. He started to enumerate with steadily mounting enthusiasm all the virtues of the etrog. The Rebbitzin swallowed her tears and said, I want to see this great find of yours. The righteous man took out the etrog and unwrapped it. It radiated its beauty, emitted its fragrance, a feast for the eyes and truly fit for the benediction. The woman said, give it to me so I can have a good look at it. She reached out and picked up the etrog. She thought of the pitiful state of her house and the distress of her children who had nothing to eat, and how the festival of Sukkot was nearly here, and she had nothing with which to make it festive. Grief drove the strength from her hands, and the Etrog slipped and fell. And having fallen, its stem broke. And the stem having broken, the Etrog was no longer fit for ritual use. The righteous man saw that its Etrog was no longer fit for the benediction. He stretched out his two holy hands in despair and said, Tefillin I have not, and Etrog I have not. All I have left is anger. But I will not be angry, but I will not be angry. Daniel's going to show us just a few minutes. A film was made called Ushpizin. Perhaps some of you have seen it. And this scene is part of that film. Please, Daniel. I'm going to stop sharing.
There we go.
שמחה. תודה נשמה.
קנו אותו?
על מה אתה מדבר?
האתרוג הזה, היפה. קנו אותו?
יש הרבה יפים.
לא, 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 הכי יפה. אתה לא זוכר, אתה רצית בשבילו 1,000 שקל.
הוא מתכוון ליהלום.
כן, 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 היהלום הזה. קנו אותו?
הוא פה.
תביא אותו. יש פה 1,000 שקל. איזה מתוק השם. חג שמח, רגיזן תשטר.
איפה היית? עוד מעט חג. צדיק. דקה 90.
זה בשבילך.
זה מקסים. שמה לא היית צריך?
תשימי לי. בואי תראי משהו.
זה יפה?
יפה? זה מה שיש לך להגיד על זה? יפה? זה היהלום.
היהלום?
ככה קוראים לו. האתרוג הכי יפה בירושלים.
תביא נראה רגע. כמה זה עלה לך?
באמת?
רק את האמת. מה? שאתה לא נורמלי.
הייתי חייב.
משה, אתה לא נורמלי.
חייב.
משה, אתה מטורף.
הייתי חייב.
אבל 1,000 שקל לאתרוג.
תודה, אל תכעסי. זה סגולה לבנים.
מי אמר לך?
זה כתוב בספרים, אתרוג ממודר, סגולה לבנים. טוב, אני בלחץ שיסגרו לי את המקווה. היי, יפים לך הגילים.
תודה.
מה אני בלעדייך? כלום, חצי בן אדם.
בסדר, בסדר, משה.
חג שמח.
חג שמח, משה.
אני מכבד את זה. איך?
בריאות, אתה יודעת, זה בריאות.
הלימון שורף את כל המחלות.
דווקא לא שמת הרבה.
לא היה רק אחד.
מה, אחד לא היה במקרר?
איפה? הפכתי את כל המקרר, לא מצאתי. אבל מה, פתאום אני קולט על המדף איזה אחד. מזל.
אני שם לימון על המדף.
זה גם מה שאני שאלתי. מי שם לימון על המדף? ולא תגיד על המדף במטבח, על המדף בסלון.
בסלון?
אוי ואבוי.
מה קרה לו?
משה, מה קרה?
משה, מה קרה?
משה, לא. משה.
אני לא מבין! אני לא מבין באמת באמונה, אני לא מבין ריבונו של עולם! מה אתה רוצה ממני? מה? אני לא מבין, רחם עליי, תסביר לי! לא רוצה לכעוס, ריבונו של עולם! לא רוצה לכעוס, מה רוצה לכעוס, ריבונו של עולם? רחם עליי, בבקשה.
What is the difference between the original Agnon story and the adaptation in the movie? Anyone?
In the movie, it's been stolen from him.
No,
No.
it hasn't.
No.
No,
It's there.
no.
There-
In the movie, his wife drops it because she's weakened by the fact that she doesn't have food to prepare for the children.
Yeah, but in the movie, she put it back in the box and then it disappeared.
But why did it disappear?
Did she sell it to someone?
No, no, no. The two men that are sitting with him in the sukkah, they use that to make
Tea.
a salad that he's eating.
Right.
Oi.
Okay, that's a technical difference.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm looking for a bigger difference. Marlene, are you trying to unmute yourself?
I'm here.
Okay.
Well, in the original story, it appeared, Agnon says the family was without food and he spent the money for the Etrog as opposed to thinking about feeding his family. In
Right.
this story, they show you purposely the kitchen, which is stocked with all kinds of food, and he's used the money from selling his tefillin not only to buy the Etrog, but to buy the earrings for his wife, which it's like, what are you doing? You're taking something that should be sacred to you, your tefillin that you should be putting on every day, and selling it and using it for not only for the Etrog, which is another ritual object, but for frivolity, but buying the earrings. And so you have to see that something is going to happen, and he's really going to pay the price of having done that.
Okay, well, he does say in the original story that, you know, there is a tradition of not wearing tefillin during Sukkot.
Right.
So he's thinking, well, for a week, and I'll come up with another way of rebuying the tefillin.
That's
On
right.
the other hand, what is another reason that's given that perhaps he reacts so strongly in the movie for them having destroyed that Etrog? Do you catch what another reason was that he wanted that Etrog?
If he has the Etrog, then maybe he will have sons.
Exactly. So that's almost a utilitarian reason that's given there. And in Agnon's story, he's not thinking of, yeah, my kids need to eat, but he's just thinking spiritually. And that's an issue. So as we have said, you need the proper balance. I mean, his kids need to eat, his wife needs to eat, he needs to eat. And so Agnon, who had come from a very traditional background, realizes as he comes to Israel that there is a need for that balance. Yes. Anyone else?
I think he diffused his wife's anger about how much he paid for the Etrog by buying her the earrings.
Yeah.
And, you know, at least he showed that he had love for his wife, and it wasn't, you know, and again, because it was to have sons, it was something that they would have to do together.
Yeah. No, I think even more than the earrings, yeah. But you have a question there of the
Is this an ulterior motive?
sincerity. Yeah. So there is a conflict there. Okay. So I want to thank everyone for your participation, and for my sister giving you hell. She does it out of love. It was not hell. It was.
No, I don't think
Bracha.
so, Bracha.
Go ahead, Marlene.
Reality.
No, I don't think it was hell. I think it was us hearing a realistic picture of what is going on in your lives day to day.
Absolutely. I was doing that to be funny.
It's not funny. Thank you, Marlene.
All right.
You're welcome, Mama.
I think
we continue to be strong and healthy, and may our boys be protected. And
Amen.
Amen.
Stan
wanted to say something.
I think that what your sister said deserves to be put out there everywhere, because you're talking about left and right, and talking about Yossi Klein Halevi earlier.
Yes.
There are people, unfortunately, in the community that tend to be left on a lot of matters. But I don't accept being left in this situation as
There
far as
isn't.
Israel is concerned.
There's no left and no right.
There is no.
I mentioned Brana Mitgang, I'm sorry, Ginsburg before. She writes to me almost every day, and one of the things she wrote is, please keep sending me things to educate me and so that I can educate others.
Well,
I've been doing that.
I've been trying. I confronted a symposium that I was supposed to be going to who wanted to discuss the war, and the topics for the bullet points for discussion were leaving out the fact that Hamas is the main point, and there seems to be a tendency to talking about peace with the Palestinians. And I made my views, and I refused to go. And but this is it's unfortunate that there are misconstrued ideas in people's heads, and unfortunately, it's some of our own people.
Yep.
Bracha, I know you're going to be using Mika Goodman as source material for your next series of classes, but there is a podcast that he has done through the Times of Israel called What Matters Now, and he really sums up our responsibility once, because you're fulfilling your responsibility as you see fit to do it for Israel. And we are going to have to be aware that what you're doing is what has to be done, and stand up and defend that your right to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marlene. In one sentence, what this Mika Goodman is saying is, we have to be loyal always to Israel. Even when we might disagree, we have to be loyal. But you should listen. If you have a problem, call Marlene and she'll direct you to how to get on that podcast with Marlene.
Very easy. Times of Israel, What Matters Now. Or look up Mika Goodman on Google, and I'm sure on YouTube, and you'll find it there.
Yes, very worthwhile listening to.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for your assistance.
Thank you, Bracha. Be well. Our
Thank
best with you all.
Stay well. You too. You too.
Thanks, Bracha.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very compelling session.
Thank you, Nechama.
Be safe.
You too.